NACDL is the association of the nation's criminal defense bar.
Welcome. My name is Anne Deschamps. Thank you so much, Bonnie. I'm so happy to be here. I am from Transcend, and we are all about meaningful work and community inclusion for people with disabilities. I am also the director of the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center, and I'm here to talk to you about the Americans with Disabilities Act and the justice system and how it applies to the justice system. And I'm really honored to be co-presenting with the Arlington County Sheriff's Office with JP and Broderick. And so I am going to, you're going to get a very, very quick lesson about how the ADA applies to the justice system so that JP and Broderick have plenty of time to talk about that application and what that looks like in Arlington Sheriff's Office. So the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed 31 years ago this July. And I was very fortunate to be on the White House lawn that day. I was a very, very, very young graduate student at the time. George W. Bush signed it into law on July 26, 1990. That was 30 years ago. And the precursor to the ADA was really the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of 1975, the Air Carriers Access Act of 1986. There was a lot of legislation addressing people with disabilities, but nothing as broad and encompassing as the Americans with Disabilities Act, hence the need for the law. So what is the ADA? Well, the ADA is federal civil rights legislation. And again, that was part of the title of my presentation. And I purposely put civil rights, and we'll say it about 1 million times in the short time I'm with you here, because we forget when talking about the application of the ADA that we're talking about civil rights. We're not talking about entitlements. We're not talking about anything but fundamental civil rights. And the goal is the full inclusion of people with disabilities in every single aspect of American society. There are 5 titles in the ADA. It's very comprehensive and dovetails well with the other pieces of legislation I was mentioning earlier. Title I is employment. I'm going to focus on Title II today, state and local government requirements. Title III is public accommodations, really private businesses, and telecommunications and the miscellaneous provisions. The definition of disability, really briefly, is an individual who has a record of or is regarded as having a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits a major life activity. And at the time the law was being written, everybody wanted a black and white list of disabilities included. But guess what? Anybody familiar with the disability arena knows there is no such thing. It really is not the name of the condition. It's how the condition affects your performance. So they came up with this definition, which is the same definition of the Rehabilitation Act. And it really is a formula. So the name of the disability doesn't matter. It's really, does the disability substantially limit one or more major life activities? And that's how you determine if you're covered by the law. I said I'm going fast and I mean it here. So briefly, Title II. Title II prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities and requires public entities to take an active role in ensuring accessibilities of all their programs, services, and activities. And I'll take a moment right here to say the best way to look at the Americans with Disabilities Act is not only a civil rights law, but as a formula, as concepts that are presented to teach all of us how to make sure we are including people with disabilities, how not to discriminate against people with disabilities. And guess what? Our society was such that it was fundamentally discriminatory against people with disabilities. So all of us, everybody, had to be taught how we include people with disabilities. What does this mean? And that's what the ADA lays out. And they do it through concepts and essential concepts. And this is difficult for a lot of people to grasp because guess what? It's not black and white. And you have to understand these concepts and how they apply to individual situations. So you can't just say this situation, is just this situation, and that's it. That's all it is. It's that situation. So each case has to be considered on in its own context on a case-by-case basis. Who's covered in Title II? Every type of state or local government entity, including all types of county, city agencies, as well as jails, prisons, courts, all parts of the justice system. Every part of the justice system that is administered by a state or local government entity is covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act. There's no part that is not. The general requirements, and this is where I'm going to introduce you to these concepts of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And again, under Title II, state and local government entities, the government entity must modify its policies, practices, and procedures. So reasonable modification of policies, practices, and procedures is the first concept. The second concept is you must provide services and programs in the most integrated setting appropriate to the person's level of need, even if a separate program exists. So we're talking about inclusion here, most integrated setting appropriate. The third concept is public entities have the obligation to ensure effective communication with people with disabilities. So the first and the overarching obligation of public entities is to ensure program access for people with disabilities. And so they have to make sure programs are accessible when viewed in their entirety. It's really important to understand that the ADA does not give special privileges or entitlements. It's about equity. And if you see in that picture, I love the picture because it really shows you the difference between equality and equity. It's not about equality, it's about giving people what they need to provide a level playing field. And you see in the picture, the picture on the left, everybody has the same thing. Well, that doesn't quite work for everybody. But in the picture on the right, everybody has what works for them, and it's different for each person. So then we have the concept of reasonable modifications. Effective communication. One of the biggest concepts, and I know Broderick and JP are going to be talking about this, is the obligation to ensure effective communication for people specifically with disabilities that affect their ability to communicate. And the way they provide effective communication is by providing auxiliary aids and services. And this can include, typical things you think of like sign language interpreters and, large print and braille and things. But again, assistive listening systems, there's a myriad, especially with today's technology, of ways to ensure effective communication. But again, keep in mind, there's just not one formula that says, okay, providing large print is the way you provide effective communication for, people who have visual impairments. That is not the case. Different people who have visual disabilities have different needs, and large print might not work for some of them. So it's case by case situation. Now, really, another important thing here is primary consideration. In determining what type of auxiliary aids and services are necessary, primary consideration shall be given to the request of the individual with the disability. So that means the state or local government must consult with the person with the disability. And again, I know JP and Broderick, I'm setting them up well for their presentation here. You got to consult with the person because they're going to know what they need for effective communication. Modifications of policies, practices, and procedures. And, this is kind of morphed into accommodations as the lexicon. State and local governments, when providing accommodations for people with disabilities, I mean, they're really modifying their policies, practices, and procedures. So that's how you make your programs accessible to people with disabilities. You have a procedure that might need to be modified in order to make it accessible for a person with a disability. And how do you know? How do you know? Well, you look at the program or the policy or the practice, you look at the person with the disability and you figure it out, and you work with the person with the disability to figure out what works to be most effective. You can see some examples there. Providing individualized assistance, even if you don't provide it for everybody else. That's a modification of a policy or a practice. Providing auxiliary aids and services to ensure effective communication. So you can see a lot of these same terms and concepts come up again and again. Okay, so what does this mean in a nutshell? And I realized I've gone lightning speed. And I will tell you that I am now officially part of the coalition. So I will be available and happy to answer questions for people who are not sure how to interpret. And that's what we do at the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center. We provide training and technical assistance on the ADA. So you will have access to us whenever you have any questions. So what does this mean? This means rules are rules, and nobody's asking anybody to change any rules. Have all your procedures, have all your rules. And it also means the ADA equals civil rights, remember? So how does this work then? There are exceptions to the rule, okay? And if in order to ensure the civil rights of people with disabilities, you might have to make exception to a rule. It's called making accommodations for people with disabilities. But again, it's not preferential treatment. This is fundamental civil rights. And if you don't take anything else away from what I'm saying, you understand that this is civil rights. And this is the great thing about this coalition, because this is all about understanding these concepts here. And I'm so excited to be a part of it. Also, just a side note, Bonnie brought this to my attention. I'm so glad she did. Lawyers may be involved in the justice system that aren't part of a public entity. They may be private lawyers. They still have obligations under the ADA, under Title III of the ADA. They must make their goods and services available to people with disabilities, including ensuring effective communication, modifying policies, practices, and procedure. Different titles of the law, still a lot of the same concepts. Again, we're being taught how to include people with disabilities here. As I said, I'm the director of the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center. We're one of 10 regional centers. Our mission, we are funded by the federal government to answer questions, provide training about the Americans with Disabilities Act. Our 800 number is 1-800-949-4232, and our website is 88info.org. And now I am so excited, really excited to turn you, and Broderick, I think I did it. I think I gave you your time. Turn things over to Broderick Lindsay and JP McMichael from the Arlington County Sheriff's Office, who have done an incredible job, a role model job of implementation of the ADA within a sheriff's office, and they're going to tell you all about it.
First of all, thank you everybody for having me. I'm part of the coalition. First of all, just like I said, I've been here for 23 years. I've been doing the ADA coordinator position for a little over a year now. Ever since COVID started, I began, and I don't know what that means, but that's when I started. Also, I want to thank my party and my good buddy, a guy who really has a passion for this and knows everything about it, JP McMichael. He's a guy who I can say is an expert in this area. He's co-sharing with me today, and like I said, as I go along, he'll probably jump in to reiterate some things, and that's what I want to happen, because we want to make sure you guys can see what we do. Before I get started, JP, is there anything you would like to let everybody know?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Bonnie, for having us, including us in this, and thank you for the great introduction. I've been with the agency now for a little over 23 years. I was the ADA coordinator prior to Captain Lindsay coming in, and before that, I was assigned to work on the training process of this. We went through a settlement with DOJ back in, it started in 2015. The settlement agreement was signed in 2016. And as we went through that process of creating training for the department, I was assigned to work with one of the captains at the time who was doing that. From that, I ended up transitioning into that position and got to work with Mid-Atlantic, who have been absolutely amazing with helping us set up this process, as well as working with the National Association of ADA Coordinators, where I'm a professional assistant with them now. I also am an adjunct professor at Marymount University in the Criminal Justice Division, and this is one of the areas that I discuss with the students as well. While we're discussing the career of criminal justice, I bring this aspect into them because it's not something that gets talked about a lot, unfortunately. My hope is, as we get done with the presentation today, the world around you starts to become more visible through the eyes of somebody that has a disability. And you begin to notice the different challenges that they face each and every day. And I think that as Captain Lindsay goes through this, you will see how we have implemented many tools to aid us with this, as well as created partnerships to ensure that we're providing everything that is needed and making sure that we're meeting the needs of the individuals that are coming into our facility to ensure that we're leveling the playing field with the ADA.
All right. Thanks, JP. What we're going to do is we're going to get this started. All right. You see the first screen where we're talking about how can you help you mindset. One of the things that we do at Arlington County is we have a how can I help you mindset, meaning that we had to craft that. We had to get to a point where that was inside the individual, every individual in this agency, where they understood that when it comes to ADA, it's everybody's responsibility to participate in it. All right, just a brief overview from what Ann talked about a few seconds ago. Title I is if the Americans Disability Act defines accommodations as any modification or adjustment to a job, the work environment, or adjustment to the way things are usually done. It provides equal opportunity to access services and the functions on a day-to-day basis. All right. It is a civil rights legislation. I know you probably gonna hear that a lot today because Ann kind of pounded that in, and I really wanted her to. It was great. It's a civil rights legislation that people don't realize. And it prohibits discrimination and guarantees that people with disabilities have the same opportunities as everyone else. This is a good point. Being incarcerated does not in any way diminish the importance of adhering to ADA standards. In fact, Title II, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act 1973 applies to any state and local government entity, just as Ann was saying, and prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability services, programs, and activities provided by the state or local entity.
And one of the things I will add in too, that Broderick talked about was the mindset. And this got started when we went under investigation from the DOJ. The sheriff immediately stated how important this was. When we did training for the entire department, she was at each and every training and talked about the importance of this and how, while we had made a mistake that caused this, that we were going to end up being the agency that people were modeled after. And I think that now, from going around and speaking, that we have achieved that, and we continue to strive to be better each and every day. But it started from the top with the sheriff as far as creating that mindset.
Absolutely, absolutely. That mindset is what I'm gonna go into now, because it permeated the entire agency, meaning it started with her and she passed it to all of us. One of the things, accommodations require teamwork. It takes everybody to do this and buy into it. It's not easy all the time. People have varying opinions, especially when we first started, but they gotta understand the reasoning behind it. It is a how can I help you mindset. So when we go into mindset, right mindset equals right attitude equals right culture. And I'm just briefly touching on this so we can see, before we get into the combination, so you can see how it came about. Mindset. There are endless list of limitations and obstacles providing accommodations for those in our care, but to be negative about it is not our focus. The question is what challenges each member of our organization and how can we help you? So that's the mindset. So if how can I help you is the mindset, that translates into an attitude. Attitude is that we will ensure that those with disabilities are in an environment that is free from discrimination are allowed the same opportunities as everyone else. We are caring, compassionate, and creative in how we address these needs. That attitude translates into a culture. Now everybody has the culture. When you go into culture, you're saying our team, meaning everyone, make sure that the needs of those who are disabled are consistently addressed. Care, compassion, and creativity are a guide as we navigate the challenges of accommodating those in our care and control.
And one of the people that I'll refer to, and I believe that Broderick talks about him a little bit later, is David Fram from the National Employment Legal Institute. And if you get the opportunity to see him speak, he is probably the most energetic speaker there is on the ADA. It's one of the best trainings that I've attended, and he's usually here a couple times a year. But he talks about the magic 5 words, and that's how can I help you? And as we all move forward today from this training, that should be how we engage with people when we first meet them, is how can I help you? And what can we do to help?
All right. And with that said, that sets me up perfectly for my next slide, JP. We get into the types of accommodations. There are a lot of different types of accommodations that we have at the Arlington County Sheriff's Office, but they're basically divided into 2 types of groups. It's a bunch of words to say that there's 2 groups: devices and services, and processes and changes and exceptions to allowances. Meaning, devices and services are those things that assist the individual with life activities that are limited due to a physical or mental impairment. One of the things that we constantly talk about when it comes to this, just a quick example before I get into the details, a quick example is our ADA hotline. A lot of people may or may not know that inmates have phone trees inside of the housing unit. From these phone trees, they can make personal calls, they could call their attorney, call their bondsman, but we set up these hotlines, these 4 digits that they can dial to get particular services. Well, one of the hotlines we set up is the ADA hotline. This ADA hotline is an individual, if they have a problem with their ADA, if they feel they need an ADA, or they have an issue with it, or if it's not being applied correctly in their opinion, they have a hotline that they can call, 4 digits, right? When they call those 4 digits, it goes straight to my office phone. My office phone, and it has a separate line for that hotline. I answer the voicemail and I handle the situation. That's on a daily basis. As we go along, you'll see, I'll mention to you why that I do get hotline voicemails from the inmates, the individuals incarcerated with us. However, it's with the process that we have, it's not as often as you think because we're very attentive to what needs to be done when it comes to ADA. The other part is, as I said, process changes, exceptions, or allowances. Okay, these are simply things that are we have to adjust to allow for individuals with disabilities, like the picture that you saw from Ann. It's a very good illustration, Ann. Things that we have to adjust to allow for the individuals with disabilities within reason, without compromising safety or security, but allows them to have the same access to things just like anybody else who's incarcerated with us. Those are the things that we put together to encompass the whole body of the accommodations that we have.
One of the things that's important to remember too is when somebody enters our facility, and this can start whether they're in court, if they have a delayed confinement. When I was the ADA coordinator, I would have individuals call in advance, advising me that I have a disability, this is what it is, and they would request accommodations and we would have them ready to go at that point. But an individual coming into the facility, as they go through the screening process for booking and processing, they can ask for an ADA accommodation, but they can also ask for it anytime that they are in the facility. It doesn't just stop at that beginning piece, it's the entire time. And that's one of the reasons that we created the ADA hotline, was so that somebody may not, depending on what's going on when somebody's brought in, that may not be on their mind at that moment. And they may get up to a housing unit and then realize, oh, I need this or I need that. And that way they had that direct line to us. So it was cutting out the middle person and making it much easier for us to start that process up.
And I can reinforce what JP just said. He passed the job to me, and that happens a lot. A lot of times, this shock of being incarcerated, or whatever the reason is that they're here, or maybe the condition they're in, might limit them from understanding when to ask. So we never say, okay, the only time you can ask is at the beginning. We have a hotline where they can ask for it after the fact, and we can take them through the process that we need to take them to make the necessary accommodations. Devices and services. One of our devices that we had that I found very interesting is and here we go, voila, ladies and gentlemen. Ubi Duo face-to-face communicator. Basically, it's just a device that we use to communicate, that individuals can use to communicate one-on-one with their case manager or whoever it is they're having a conversation with if they have a problem with communication. They can use this for two-way communication, right? They can use this as a face-to-face communicator. As you see, it starts off really simple. You have two bars on each side of it. It's almost like you're playing the old Battleship game that we used to have as kids. One side, a person starts a conversation, the other person can see in real time as he's typing that conversation. And then they can communicate back and forth. Now, this isn't a new idea. A lot of people may be saying, well, that's what texting is for. That's what a lot of things are for. The difference is because this is head-to-head and is connected by Bluetooth, and the nuance of speech isn't lost. Speech is a lot of facial expressions. Speech is a lot of communication. Forgive us, I know I'm guilty of this sometimes. We don't exactly wait till the other person to finish communicating in a regular conversation. A lot of times, there are a lot of things in our language that's implied. This emulates that because it's live, it's real time, it's face to face, and they go back and forth with a full-fledged conversation.
As we go through the different devices, it's important to remember too that every person is a different individual. Every case that we have, every disability is going to require different accommodations. These are just some of the items that we have. I mean, we've tried lots and lots of different things. If somebody comes in and has a accommodation that they need, like I said in the beginning, we will partner with other agencies. We will look to find the proper device or aid to assist them to make sure that their needs are met.
And I'm probably going to say this twice. Thanks, JP. I'm going to say this twice, but it's worth saying twice. Anne alluded to it perfectly. There's no way you can do this without speaking to the individual. It's a team effort between you and the individual who needs the accommodation. They've lived their life. They know the accommodations that suit them. It's up to them to communicate with you and you to communicate with them. Seek them out, have a conversation so you can both craft the appropriate accommodation. None of these things are like set in stone or a cookie cutter, in other words, where you just automatically do this. Somebody has a hearing impairment, we do this. If somebody is visually impaired, we do this. No, you have to talk to the individual and find out exactly what they need and how can I help you? Find out what they need and try to accommodate that. Don't ever put anybody in a box. Ask them. You have to have the conversation. Now, I'm saying that as a captain, but I'm sure JP could co-sign that starts from the deputy who's working and booking when the person is first brought in by the police department. It starts down there. Hey, look, do you have any disabilities? Yes, I do. What accommodations do you require? And they're going to hear it at least 3 or 4 more times before they get upstairs. And when they get upstairs, there are signs up telling them that there's a hotline to call where you want to, if you have an ADA issue. So there's lots of things going on. All right. Again, with the Ubi Duo, I just had to put a couple of our recruits on give them a quick picture. As you see, they go face to face and they can carry on a conversation. All right. Next slide. Purple Communications, okay, VRS and VRI. VRI is our video remote interpreting. VRS is video relay services. Both of these are slightly different and they do different things. I'll start with VRS real quick. This company, Purple Communication, provide these devices that allow us through an app and on their programming to communicate and to assist individuals who have hearing impairments. For example, VRS is video relay services. That's more or less a phone call to a particular number so that the individual can talk to somebody through an interpreter. They'll have a video on their end, which is our side of it, which is, say they're here, our side of it have video hooked up, and they could have a phone conversation with somebody on a phone call because the interpreter is speaking to that other person. We have that already set up. It's here and it's available to them. As you see up at the top, before we move on, Purple Communications, we have 3 facets of it. To the far left, you see our iPad version. Right, our iPads, we have like 5 or 6 of them, plus Surface Pros that we take upstairs to accommodate individuals on the various things that they need. And these apps that they have are very essential. In fact, they make these a popular device. The second 2 pictures, the middle 2, the second one is the Surface Pro. The first one's the iPad, the second one's the Surface Pro. And the last 2 are a hardline station that's down in Booking, where an individual could come in and use these services, either talk to his attorney, talk to his family, to explain things. If they need it, we have it on hand. We did what we had to do to get it. Again, I'll reiterate what JP said at the very beginning. Yes, we had a situation. It was a negative situation, but we turned a negative situation to something in which we committed ourselves to doing the best we could to be the best at it, right?
And when we talk about effective communication, using these services, one of the things that's important is ensuring that the interpreter that you have, if it's a legal matter, understands legal terminology. If it's a medical matter, they understand the medical terminology. So that way there is no confusion with what's going on.
And to add on to that, Purple Communication, their interpreters, they have those guys who can do that. Those interpreters that they have are qualified, certified interpreters to communicate effectively in all those various situations. So,
and you'll also see the room where the Purple service is set up at is hardwired. One of the issues when you're utilizing an interpreter using an iPad is if for some reason your Wi-Fi goes out or your Wi-Fi is not acting properly, that's not effective communication. It needs to be just like me and you having a conversation right now. You need to be able to see it in real time and ensure that everything is working perfectly. If it's not, we would then get the individual down to that unit so that we would be able to do that and make sure the communication was effective.
Right. Outstanding. Next slide. Insight Video Interpreting and Language Line. Another app, iPad and Surface Pro app that we use. But primarily the part that we use the most in regards to ADA is the sign language portion that you see in that second slide, second picture to the right at the very top. That's pretty much exactly like VRI. However, it's through an app device that we use quite frequently and is readily available through Wi-Fi. Purple is able to be used in various different areas, but this particular one could be used through Wi-Fi. But if this ever fails, as JP was saying, we automatically default right back to Purple and do what needs to be done.
One of the great things with this service too is they have over 280 languages on there. Some are just audio, some are video. As you see with the sign language, the little video camera picture there. So when you click on it, you have those options. They also have interpreters. If we were to have somebody, and this was something that I found out a couple years ago, a tactile interpreter. So if somebody is hearing impaired and vision impaired, this service has tactile interpreters, and it may take us a little longer to get them, but they have them available. And how that works, if you're not aware of it, is they do the, and correct me if I'm wrong, and they do the signs on the palm of the hand.
No, you're absolutely right, JP. And you know, again, different people have different modes of communication, but it's really signing and doing gestures into the hand of the individual.
Okay. So with that said, that's another effort to start off with what we're saying. We're trying to go above and beyond what we need to do, have available to them. And a lot of these things that JP that JP brought into effect is because he talked to the individual. He reached out to other agencies and said, what do you do? And once you do that, and once you set that up, you start to develop a hard line with all these devices. And today I'm only touching on a few. There are a lot of devices in my office right now. So with that said, we just continually develop and add to our arsenals of ways we can accommodate these individuals. Let's see. This is a popular one. I'm going to credit JP with this. Visual alert pages. As you may or may not know, a lot of times in a jail setting, it's a group setting, meaning the deputy who runs the housing unit, who is in there with them, because it's direct supervision, that means the deputy's in there with them, has to communicate with the group as a whole, whether it's calling them to go to their cells, whether it's telling them that the med round nurse is in, whether it's to tell them that the canteen guy is delivering right now. He has to communicate with the whole. Shift change, head count, those are things that are hardwired into their daily routine. So how do you do this? How do you make sure that an individual who is hard of hearing hears the announcement or knows that there's an announcement being made? Visual alert pages. Y'all have seen these before. I think everybody has, especially if you like Cheesecake Factory like me, or Applebee's or places like that. It's an alert pager. What it does is basically alerts you that somebody wants your attention concerning something. It's a standard system that you find in any restaurant. It can be used for those with hearing disabilities. A lot of times people assume it's just for those with hearing disabilities. However, I did have a case recently where an individual who had a visual disability used it also, which is designed for it because it has flashing lights on it. So what he does is, as he's doing stuff at his desk in his cell, and he sees the light, he knows that the housing unit deputy wants his attention. He can come to the door and he can act based off that. It's just one of those little things, again, that's in our arsenal that helps us provide accommodations.
And an example of where we had to make a switch with this was when we were initially looking at these, the devices that we got were what DOC uses, and it looks like an alarm clock, and it hooks up to, it's called a bed shaker that sits under the mattress. So when the alarm goes off, it will shake the mattress. And it has a separate box that sits at the deputy station. Well, when we tested this and we hit the button to alert the inmate in their cell, the cell phone rang in the unit next door. So you have to, when you're bringing these devices in, you have to ensure that they work in the environment. And so we had to go around, even with these, we went around when they came in and we had to test them in all the units to make sure that they worked properly, to ensure that they were given the notifications when they were supposed to get them.
And JP, if I'm correct, can you correct me if I'm wrong? This is the second generation of visual alert pages that we have. We're on the second set, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So we had a set. They got used so often that it got to the point where, you know, they weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing. We did what we did. We did what we had to do and replaced them with a new set, which turned really, like I said, these are the ones that when our guys come in who have hearing impairments and they find out we have them, they do give us compliments. Like they tell us, hey, look, this is amazing because now I don't have to worry about staying up or making sure I see this or looking out the window or looking out the window constantly or having my cellmate next door give me a call. Now I have a pager so I can handle issues and things that need to happen on my own. So it works pretty effectively. Ocular device. This particular device is used just as a monocle, and you've probably seen these before. The way it works is you take print that you have for a person who's visually impaired, has a visual impairment, and there you go. You use it as a magnifier, and it blows it up 1 time to 50 times. You can change the backlight. A lot of times, there's a particular inmate who was in here, I think almost 6 months ago, and he said that he had problems. He could see most efficiently in shades of green. And what it does, I didn't notice at the time because I didn't have the instruction manual, but he knew the device. And it has a shade of green, which allowed him to see and read periodicals, read library books, and it gave him access to things that he didn't he wouldn't have had access to. When he went to class, he could read the books, things like that. So what we did was we issued it and we kept changing it out so it could recharge, change it out. We have more than one, change it out so he could utilize it. When it was time for him to go, we took it back. But he really appreciated the fact that once he had to talk with me and I found out what he needed, I knew in my arsenal, my grab bag, that I had something to help him and accommodate him with that.
And there's many types of those devices as well. And if you go, I know Mid-Atlantic's going to be doing their conference in September, I believe, and one of the great things about that conference is they have the vendors there with all the new devices that are coming out so that you can pick them up, play with them, see how they work, get demonstrations to see what might work for you and your agency.
Okay. All right. Again, like I said, there were things that we split up, ADA accommodations directives. Now, this is very interesting. I was told that I might want to do this because it's something that a lot of people who don't know about the inner workings of a facility like ours, how does this information get out to our guys who are on the line, who are on the front lines, the guys who are in the housing units? Well, part of it is the training, but part of it is a directive. You hear the word directive all the time, but this is an ADA accommodations directive. Directive simply means that this isn't a guideline for our staff. Our organization it's not a secret. It's a law enforcement organization. It's paramilitary, meaning that this isn't a guideline. This isn't something where it's a nice suggestion. This means that when you're dealing with this particular individual, this is how you will deal with them. So these directives are divided into two groups: process changes and exceptions and allowances.
And as he's getting ready to go into this, I will kind of preface everything. When new recruits come in, we do a 4-hour training block with them on the ADA. And when they come back from the academy, we do another 2-hour block with them. And we go over the directives and the devices and let them know as they're going up to work in a housing unit or they're going to warrants or wherever they may be assigned to, how these are going to impact them. And we go over not only the general directives like you're going to see, the accommodations directives like you'll see. When I was doing the class, I would also show some of the more in-depth ones. We've had a couple that are very in-depth, lots of things in them. And I try to give them a view of not just the basic ones, but some of the ones where you really have to go through them, pay attention to what's on there, and be aware of what you're going to be addressing.
And this is also that point where you craft with the individual who's incarcerated to come up with the best accommodation for them. You really, like I said, this is not cookie cutter. Yes, we know there's some allowances that they have to have, but this is also a conversation that needs to be had. Process changes, simply means we're adept at our process. We adapt our process to provide accommodations as long as it does not unreasonably affect safety and security and protocols. That's straight from ADA. Exceptions. We accept some form of rule exception to accommodate a disabled individual. Again, this is only if the accommodation does not unreasonably affect safety and security protocols. Allowances. We allow the inmate to do certain things that in an effort to accommodate their disability. All the directives you're about to view are examples of directives we have and were drafted for the purposes of the presentation. All names and ID numbers are fictitious.
And these, again, are why we do these is to level the playing field. This is not to give anyone advantage over anyone else. It's to ensure that they have access to the same things that everyone else does.
And that's why the example that Ann gave, the visual example, was perfect. This just levels the playing field. In this particular accommodation, you see an individual has a bottom bunk and lower tier. One thing you will not see in the ADA accommodations is this: you won't have any specific definition of what their disability is. You won't have any quotes or anything like that, medical diagnoses. None of that goes into this. It's just how the deputy, when interacting with him, the accommodations they should afford them. Anything that's out of the ordinary, anything that doesn't go along a mainstream style, it's listed in here. And it's kept in a whole bunch of places. First, it's kept on my main file on the computer. It's kept in the deputy's main file on the computer. It's kept in inmate services main file on the computer. And there's a general folder that we have for all supervisors to get to that has them in there also. So it's available to everyone. And I do believe, JP, correct me if I'm wrong, they upload it into CJRMS also.
Yes,
So,
when you go into our computer system and you bring up an inmate's file, they will have an alert. And when you click on that alert, it will tell you what their accommodations are. And those are updated as Captain Lindsay meets with each of the individuals that has an ADA accommodation weekly. He updates those, meets with medical, works with DHS, and they are continually updated. They don't remain the same all the time.
yes, and that's a good point. And you've raised a good point. I think I might mention this later, but I'll go ahead and say it now just in case. The fact of the matter is I weekly go through the jail and do what we call an ADA round, where I meet with each and every individual to see if there's anything on their accommodation that they need to adjust. This is where I was telling you that it slows down my voicemails, because the fact of the matter is that I meet with them every week and they know that I'm going to be there. And what happens is they come up to me, and if there's something that needs to be adjusted, we adjust it. We work on it. We do what we have to do to see what we can do. And I work with medical, I work with DHS, I work with inmate services, all facets of my jail to see if we can accommodate them. And also what it does is now in a lot of cases, they'll say, you know what, everything's good, Captain Lindsay, everything's fine. And they'll give me the thumbs up, and I know I can go to the next guy on the list, right? I do that weekly. In fact, I just did it yesterday, right? So that's something that we do on a consistent basis. In this particular one, a person needs a lower bunk and a lower tier and a wheelchair in this particular situation. So we can assume from the inclination that there's a mobility issue, and there might be a physical issue also why he needs a bottom bunk and a lower tier accommodation. This is established by medical staff to affirm the need for the accommodation prior to one being issued. In point 3, you see an example of process change and an allowance. Though the individual is not exempt from the rules, and you see that in there also, it means not exempt from taking part in head count. Even though the individual is not exempt from the rules, the deputy is expected to account for their disability and use discretion with regard to standard operations and disciplinary actions. So that's what we're trying to get our deputies to think outside of the box, in the sense of when you're dealing with somebody who has a disability, let's look at what we're doing here. Understand that there's certain things that they can't do as quickly or in the same fashion as somebody else. And guess what? Take that into consideration. However, on the other end, as Ann was saying, it's not saying it's an exemption, and it's not saying that they don't have to follow the rules. So it's that balancing act we strike between the two to get things done.
And I did see one of the questions that was asked was the assessment process, and that begins when the person first enters the facility. They're asked a series of questions as they come into booking. They're asked a series of questions again when they go to processing. They're then seen by medical and asked a series of questions again. And that is where we initially will generate the accommodation. But as I said earlier, a person can ask for an accommodation at any time. If Captain Lindsay goes upstairs to do his rounds, somebody sees him and they come up and ask a question, they can generate that at that point. They can tell the deputy they need something. The zone sergeant can generate one. There's a whole, the process is very fluid when it can be started. And I know we only have a couple minutes left, Lindsay, so I will let you wrap up.
Okay. All right. Let's move to the next one. This one is simple. This is a little bit more complex, but it shows the differences between allowances, process change, and exceptions. I have them highlighted differently. If you look at that, you see that certain things are highlighted differently. Device allowances, basically a hearing aid for this individual. Process changes, staff are to physically go to inmate Smith's cell to make all notification. All right. With that, he has a hearing aid, so therefore they need to physically go. This will be required until a visual alert pager is issued. In the event that so it's setting parameters for our staff to follow. It's very incumbent upon them as a housing unit deputy to understand who has an accommodation inside of the housing unit and make sure they check, because it's right there on a computer and in physical copy. They can look at it and say, okay, look, this is what I'm supposed to do with regard to this individual. And also, I forgot to say this, the inmate has a copy of this as it's generated also. Anytime we update it, anytime we adjust it, the inmate gets a copy of this updated direct accommodation. All right, let's go to the next slide. This one I wanted to speak on based off what I kind of previewed what Ann was saying, and I kind of threw this in. As far as with the coalition, we have individuals who come across our paths who have developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities, and that is becoming more prominent as the days and years press on. So this is a particular one where I had to craft for an individual how we related to him as far as on a day-to-day basis. So one of the things was, all written communication should be read and explained to the inmate by ACSO staff. If you keep reading, you see different facets of it. Medical gets involved, ISC gets involved. Everybody has a stake. Everybody who has a stake in this individual when it comes to communication can get involved depending on the circumstances, but it's explained fully there. All right. Also, preparing written communications, that was an issue also. So we made sure in all of these cases that we made an accommodation to accommodate those things because this individual told me that. The individual said, hey, look, this is a times where I have issues, I have problems. Plus, I reached out to my most viable resource. I went 2 doors down and talked to Captain McMichael, JP. Hey, look, what do we do in this situation? How should I approach this? And this is what we crafted and put together. So now forever and a day, if I deal with somebody, and this is, in fact, this accommodation is on a majority, this particular one is that we crafted is on a majority of guys who have intellectual and developmental disabilities.
And then this position, which is, what's interesting about it is we become an advocate for the inmate, for their needs. And as I said in the very beginning of this, we have to not make assumptions about people, and we have to try to look at the world through somebody else's eyes and walk in their shoes. And when you start to do that, as you go out today after this is done, you will begin to see all of the challenges that are faced by individuals with disabilities of various types.
Exactly. And last slide, everyone. Basically, this was just me kind of letting everything out. ADA accommodations are an essential part of ensuring that the rights of those who are disabled in our community are protected. They ensure that they are given fair and non-discriminatory treatment throughout the federal, state, and local system. We must continually challenge ourselves to think outside the box and use best practices concerning those in our care with disabilities. Remember, team, in the words of David Fram of the National Employment Law Institute, when addressing ADA, the magic words are, how can we help you? And that concludes my end of the presentation.